you want to book acting work. We hear that, and we want you to have that. But here's the thing. The industry is desperate for leaders, for human connection. And that's what it really wants, even if it doesn't feel like that. And that's how you book work.
By taking you inside the craft, the casting room, and the business, and bringing other industry experts into the conversation, we really dig in. We pull back the curtain of the industry and show you how much power you really have as an artist. By bringing your humanity to the work and the industry, you become an artistic leader, the kind of actor who books work.
Nothing excites us more than seeing you express your unique artistic voice in the work and humanize the business.
And have all the tools you need to be a championship-level working actor at this very time in an industry that needs your voice and your leadership.
Industry and artistry. This is the only place you're going to hear this.
I'm Risa.
And I'm Steve, and this is the Acting Podcast from the BGB Studio.
Hi, Steve.
Hello, Risa.
Well, we're talking today about your relationship with your family, loved ones.
Wait, with my family?
Yeah,
Oh,
with
right.
your what?
Yes.
So what comes up around that?
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
so much.
So much. And we all have that, you
Of
know, and
course.
when we deal with our family outside of this little bubble of work and career that we've created for ourselves, what does that look like when you're going home for holidays, when you're dealing with family at a wedding or an event, or even dealing with people, friends and family who are not inside your world? What is that like to have to then manage that, manage all the feelings that come up and manage their expectations?
So many landmines in all of this, particularly
Yeah.
given that most actors have, by virtue of answering this call to pursue this, zigged to their family zag, typically. This is like, oftentimes they're the outlier. It's not always the case. You know, you get the kids of actors showing up to the industry, but for the most part, it's this was a singularity in someone's family. And as someone who's raising two kids, and you're raising two kids also, Risa, we know how big the feelings are from the family standpoint. You know, regardless of their intention, there are big feelings, either because you want so much for this person that you've invested so much in, or you just genuinely want them to be happy and healthy, and they've chosen an industry that's emotionally violent and that doesn't offer steady income. So, and a myriad of other reasons why, the whole thing is fraught with landmines. But it gets tricky.
Yeah, I feel that with my daughter, you know, being that she's entering this industry in some way, don't know what it'll ultimately be for her, but I feel so protective of her, but I understand it. I mean, she's lucky in that she's grown up in this world, and so she has certain information and experiences to navigate that. But I didn't have that. You didn't have that.
Right.
You know, I grew up in a family that was, both my parents were creative people, but they had given that up for a life they'd chosen. They thought they had to. My father, songwriter, my mother, a dancer. And so in some ways I had the support in that they wanted me to go and live the life that I dreamt because it was fulfilling things for them, but with such, caution. I remember when my mother died, I found a box of every clipping of everything, every program, anything that and she'd never really said, "I'm proud of you." During all that, I heard that at the funeral. Your mother was so proud of you. And then I found this box
Wow.
of stuff, and she never, ever said anything. But she kept this huge pile, this huge stack of everything I had ever done. And that's what happens. Families don't often express that to their kids.
Sure.
And so we don't know that. There's such a disconnect between where we are, where our hearts are, where our desires are, where our yearnings are and our ambitions, and our parents and our family's understanding of that.
Right. So perhaps the first step in all this, and by the way, everyone has their version of this, right? Like
Yes.
you talk to mom or dad or sister or brother or your partner or your kids even after
Yeah.
the audition.
Yeah.
And with all the anticipation, they say, "How did it go?"
Yeah.
And you have to say, whatever you say, "I shat the rug," or, the utter elation of "I'm going straight to wardrobe, I booked it," which is rare.
Yeah.
Or the I don't know. And I know, but I'm feeling the pressure from you when you ask the question, like, leave me alone.
Yeah. And I know
Like,
you
don't
want,
ask.
I know you want the best for me.
Of course.
Yeah, but it's so much because
Right.
it's so loaded in those relationships. I think we have to acknowledge first how loaded that is.
Right. Because the actors are oftentimes barely hanging on emotionally themselves, right? So to then have to hold space for someone else's excitement or anticipation or potential disappointment, or how do I deal with you? Is it going to be a disappointment or, a joyous situation, or what's it going to be? It's sort of like when someone's, terminally ill. This is awful, but when someone's terminally ill, they end up having to hold space for the people that are seeing them, and so sad for them and their experience.
Yeah,
It's
we
like,
have to take care of those people. But you know what? In a way we do, and we'll get to that. How do you take care of those people?
That's right.
Because there are ways to do that. But first, you have to take care of yourself.
Right.
And so let's talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, and so when you get those questions or those, what you really need to do is you should get on that NCIS show. That's it. You got to get on that show. That's the right show. Uncle, what's his name says.
Yeah.
And it speaks to they have no idea how this industry works. They see the 0.1%, the swimming pools and champagne and red carpets, and they think that's what this thing is. And so you're in pursuit of that. So go do that.
Go do that. You should be on that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, cousin, what's his name, knows someone who's in the sound department at university.
Yeah.
You should talk to, all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So all these external forces are being thrown at you, and you feel like on some level you need to acknowledge or present some sort of notion of things are going great when they're really not, or whatever that is, or deal with hold space for their feelings, manage their feelings. And I think all of this has to start from you knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that when you go back, let's say, for Thanksgiving dinner or holiday dinner or whatever, and there's tension in the air and all you're hearing is, cutlery on a plate, and it's sort of thick, and someone raises their head and says, so how's Hollywood treating you, or whatever they say.
Making a living yet?
Whatever that ridiculousness is. So I've seen you on anything? What you been in? How's that? That kind of stuff, which can be so triggering because it forces you to look at, wait a minute, what have I done since last year at this dinner?
Right. Yeah.
And the answer may not be anything that would satisfy Uncle what's his nuts.
And know that they want the best for you. Potentially.
But maybe they don't, right? Well, let's account for the variations in family dynamics.
But they don't want you to fail. They sometimes they want you to be accountable. It's like, your brother's a lawyer. All your friends are doing such and such. They all own homes. Like, what are you doing? So it can be confrontational, or it can be challenging. But ultimately, they want you to be ultimately successful and happy, and what is their idea of success versus yours.
So then you show up with a feeling like you need to present a success.
Right.
So you're giving them the Instagram version of, well, I saw Viola Davis at lunch the other day, or whatever, or she walked by me, or I got a call back for this. You start leading with the fodder that may excite them or think like you're doing something,
which feels really false.
Oof, yeah. And you need a vacation from that vacation when you come back, and like finally after 3 days of the holidays, your shoulders can release a little bit, and you come back to some reality. But you start compartmentalizing and putting this best foot forward, quote unquote. So what if you did the work of knowing what this was for you, knowing why you did this on a really fundamental, deep level.
Which, by the way, is work that you guys need to do all the time, not just because you're on the, you're waiting to board your plane to go home for the wedding or the holiday or whatever that is. You need to do this on a really fundamental level, always go on.
And so what if you were able to show up in that situation and accurately articulate with a great degree of honesty why you do this, and what it is for you and what it is not, and et cetera, so that when you get asked those questions and have to deal with the ridiculousness, you don't have to become some false person or some version of yourself that you think they want to see. And I think that will probably make your situation with your family a little easier. It'll make life a little bit easier for you.
So you have to start with that, right? For that,
absolutely.
Go deep into why I'm doing this really ultimately, which is not necessarily or ultimately to get that guest star or co-star on NCIS or any of those shows. We want that for you, but that's not why you're doing this, and that's not going to be your consistent happiness or success or satisfaction.
Sure. Now, that may not be enough for Aunt What's-Her-Name.
Yeah.
she may think that that's ridiculous, that you're putting yourself through that.
Yeah.
Why don't you just go back to school? What's the matter with you? Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so we'll get to the next step of this, which is boundaries.
Right.
But at the same time, like, you got to know for yourself at all times, and I think that will manifest itself in that situation more effectively if you do know why you're doing this on a really clear fundamental level, what it is for you, what it is not for you. What I mean by that is, this isn't necessarily the thing that's paying your rent right now. Did last month, but maybe not this month, or whatever that is. But
or not yet, or
any of that. Account for the truth of whatever that is, and know why you're still doing it.
Yeah.
So if you can speak from that authority of, this is who I am, full stop. This is what I am doing, full stop. And here's why, full stop. Unless someone's a complete asshole, which they may be, or they've had a few and so they're a little tipsy and shooting their mouth off, you can speak from some authority. And it's undeniable if you declare who you are and what you're doing and why. And that may be a discussion, but if they say, well, that's ridiculous, what they're saying is, that wouldn't work for me. I don't have the stones to do that.
Right.
I couldn't navigate those emotional, financial, et cetera, ups and downs. Well, so you're not me. So
Right.
go back to your accounting job or whatever, with no disrespect. But we want different things out of life. Take care.
And I think that if people hear your heart, your vulnerability, your why, you're coming back to the truth of why this is important to you, why this matters to you, they may hear things a little bit differently. If you
Maybe.
know what that is, if you really keep coming back to that, I think it'll give you clarity in your life and your career overall, because you need to keep doing that and keep coming back to, this is why this fills me up.
Right.
Because I think the positive of it it's not about being defensive. It's about being able to offer, I live and breathe this. This is what it does for me.
Yeah.
This is why I need this. This is the part of it that is important. This is the part of it that may be the reward or the result of that. But I am in this part of it. I am in the discovery part of it. I am in the filling up my tank. I am in the being an artist part of it. I am in the creating part of it. And that makes me happy and fills me up. And I need it. It's like oxygen for me. And I get that may not be your world, but this is where I'm at with this. This is the love that I have for this love affair I have with this thing. And then the other stuff goes away because it can't hold a candle to that kind of internal validation and personal passion.
And what is so interesting, and I think worthy of gratitude, of going back to a situation like that where people seemingly don't understand you, and cousin Jackass, who's like the investment banker, asks a bit of a loaded question with a little bit of a snide whatever, or maybe you're projecting or whatever, is that it forces you to declare who you are. That it's actually not those people being jerks. They may not just get it. They just don't understand. Fine.
Yeah.
But it asks you to declare yourself. And if you're not sure, if that internal battle, even in yourself, is, well, I'm not a lead on a TV series right now. By the way, that can even be true of people who go back when they were leads on TV series 2 years ago, but not now, right?
Oh
like
my
it's
God.
like all the time, right?
The more, again,
the
as we
shame
always
is,
talk.
right.
The more success you have, the more challenge. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, but it forces you to know for yourself, why are you doing this and what matters to you?
Yeah.
And
what a great exploration. So we offer that to you as a time for you to come back to that, to explore that, and to take ownership of that. Really get in the muck of that, because if you can express that to other people, then you get to really take ownership of it. You get to really know what that is for yourself.
You know, I do want to account for those folks who are going back to situations that are very, very difficult. I mean, families get really challenging. And I think it's also important, beyond knowing why you do this, that you have a clear sense of your boundaries. And if you are so clear on why you're doing this and why it's important, and there's a consistent barrage of snide remarks or, making you feel less than, then my goodness, limit your time. And, this is none of my business, but I'm saying, like, create whatever boundaries you need to create so that you get the family time that either you're obligated to put in or that you feel you need to, but so you don't come back beat up.
Yeah.
And that's really hard for a lot of folks, I think. There's an expectation that you go back for the holidays or whatever. But if it comes at a cost, I think that gets tricky. So, boundaries look like limiting the time, limiting the space, being really clear about this is the time I have, this is the time I don't have. So, not letting someone dictate your time for you.
Yeah.
With family, you can kind of just go on autopilot sometimes, or go back to, old relationships the way they were when you were 14 or 13 or whatever. But that stuff gets really tricky, I think. And so figuring out where it's time to allow for the space together, and also where it's time for the personal boundary so that you're not wrecked. That is so important.
You need to take that kind of space, because what we all tend to do when we go back to families, we tend to regress into old relationships that never matured. So now you're 14 again, because that's when it was the most heightened, toxic, or crazy. And so we tend to go back into those places and forget. We've got to have a real awareness and consciousness of, this is what happens when I'm with my mother and father. This is what happens when I'm with my sister who has 3 kids. This is what happens when I'm with my uncle who has different political or, socioeconomic views than me. This is what happens when I'm with my friend's husband who judges me because I make his wife feel a certain way, and then when I leave, she misses her old life as an actor. All those things. So knowing what that is, and knowing that you're stepping back often, you're unmaturing yourself, if that's even a concept.
Sure.
And just that self-awareness to go, oh shit, this is triggering me. This is bringing this shit up for me. So
Right.
I need to protect myself from all of this, and creating space for that. I remember when I first learned this, when I went home, I'm going to take some time for myself, because you feel like there's so much obligation. And there's a fantasy also about what this looks like. What about taking time for yourself away from all of that? Personal space, personal time, and even stuff that's going to creatively fill you up. Go to a movie you really want to see. Go write somewhere. So when you come back to your family and you walk back into the house or back into the situation, you've just filled yourself up with something that's made you feel good.
This writing that's essential, because it's something you could do in private, but it is a meditation. You are exploring,
We're
you are
talking
expressing.
journaling, all kinds. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. To do that, even if you're staying at a place where you don't necessarily feel anything but tension, that's a beautiful portal into your creative world that you can do without screaming at somebody.
Yeah, and getting all that out. And I go one step further with that. What about writing about that? So you're journaling, or you're doing the morning pages, or whatever you're doing, and you're just getting it out, and you're dealing with it. You're walking, you're meditating, you're exercising, you're doing things to really process through all this. But then write about these people. The people I know who are the most extraordinary writers write about family. I'm thinking of playwrights I know, Richard Greenberg and Ed Baker, and people who I know who write about family, because that's how they deal with the toxicity.
Right.
So what about observing that and writing about that a little bit? And,
Sure, no doubt.
And because that's what and it's going to be just coming out all over the place.
Right.
And also be careful about what you consume. This kind of stuff makes you want to eat more, drink more, do all kinds of things to dull all of that stuff that's coming at you.
Well, what you're talking about here is, can we go back to a situation like that and be present, and not run from it by drinking too much or eating all the stuff or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard. Like, it takes some fortitude.
Yeah.
But I think with a bit of self-knowing and some boundaries, I think it's doable. It's just challenging. And then the other piece of it is compassion and understanding in all this. And
that's big.
I think once you understand yourself, you'll likely understand that here you are, a hypersensitive creature. So much of my challenges with family generally, including my kids and my wife, is that I'm so hypersensitive. And that means that I have to be protective, but you have to understand that they didn't get the memo, right? Like, when you go back, or for they're in their lives, and they haven't been exploring, truthful emotional expression all day, every day. Like, they're not actors, chances are.
Yeah.
So they may or may not get that on some level. And so understanding where they come from, understanding the limitations that they may have. If you're all day, every day around people who are working on themselves and in therapy, and not that your family isn't, but just like that you're with those people who are really open with their feelings, and you go back to a situation which people don't necessarily understand that because they're not actors or artists or hypersensitive themselves, you have to know that and know that that environment is going to be different, and that asking them to really see you and hear you is tantamount to asking, someone who doesn't have the use of their legs to walk. It's not going to happen. And so if you can approach it from a place of compassion, and that requires understanding of, the landscape that created them or got them to that place, then you'll realize that what you can expect and what you can't.
And in that, I love that you're saying that, because what that does is also just brings us back to humanity. So now you understand that somebody has their stuff and they're dealing with whatever that is, their own insecurities, their own challenges, and then we meet each other as human beings. We have compassion for somebody, understand them, and really meet them where they're at, and ultimately, there's probably common ground in that.
Sure.
Everybody's going through the same stuff. Everyone's coming to that same Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas gathering or wedding or bar mitzvah or, christening or whatever that is with the same crap. People are so loaded. So to understand what that is, one of the things I've always tried to do, I just did it at a wedding recently a couple of weeks ago, was to be present for other people, ask them questions, see where they're at. And then what happens? You find common ground with somebody that you thought, I don't know, this guy puts an alarm system somewhere outside of Philadelphia. But then what I really got to was, he lost someone in his life and he was feeling lonely, and we got to a common place, which was far more interesting than what I'm doing in my career, and so that's something that you can potentially find with somebody either that you know or that you don't know. And again, as you said, you may just hit the wall with somebody who just doesn't want to have it. Then you move away from that person. But there's got to be somebody who you can connect with on a human level and find some common emotional ground, human ground.
The black belt version of this is going back, knowing everyone's limitations, knowing that they may not be able to see you the way that you've always wanted to be seen.
Yeah.
They may not, even parents may not be able to give you everything that you want, in terms of emotional connection, because they may have their limitations. And can you show up with an understanding that you are not that person, that you are emotionally open and are doing the work of that, and that they are not, and that you can be there to gently guide them to a place. But to minimize your expectations in all that, because you understand the landscape. That's really important, I think.
And that's generosity. That's being able to approach this with a certain amount of generosity, which is almost the antithesis of how do I show up and defend my stuff? It's like, forget about all that. Let's get away from that. Nobody's really ultimately interested in that. They're interested in their own human experience. And so how can you help either guide them or connect with them on that level?
And there's so many parallels between an actor's relationship to the industry and the people in the industry, particularly the hierarchy, the people with the quote unquote power. And I believe that oftentimes actors just transfer parental relationships to a casting director, agent, teacher,
and
all
making
of that
yourself
stuff.
small and powerless.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's the same principle, right?
Yeah.
Like self-knowing, creating boundaries, understanding the limitations, compassion. Where can I serve? Where is there space for presence? Whether you're dealing with the industry or your family or Thanksgiving dinner, it's the same damn thing. Mm-hmm. But again, it requires work. It requires practice. It's a consistent practice that to show up and not be in this place of, well, what's in it for me? I need to protect.
One thing that is important in all of this is to find and know who your allies are. I know for me that when I've gone home, if I know my friend Della is available to me and nearby or with me, she gets me. We grew up together. She always got me. And if I know she's there, she's my touchstone, my anchor, and all the crazy stuff around us doesn't really matter because she's there. And so there's often somebody who can ground you in that. And if not, the person with you at a family event or gathering, there's somebody who you can Skype with or call or text with, not just anybody, but somebody who really grounds you, who can be your touchstone and who can give you that kind of sense of self to just keep bringing you back to yourself and your truth.
I know an actor who works quite a bit in different cities, and he's part of this religious organization that feeds the homeless. They're all over the world. And so wherever he goes, he does his best to find that organization. And he'll actually go from set to, that city's version of Skid Row to feed the homeless. And it's a similar situation when there's family involved. If you can find that place that is a connecting, grounding place for you, if you're in the program, find meetings, AA or otherwise, Al-Anon, et cetera, wherever you are. So, and again, whatever that is for you, you can do some work to find some sort of place that you got to duck out to get grounded if you need to. And again, all of this is just about trying to create space for you in this situation, so you don't get those old triggers and they cloud your experience.
Speaking of family, because something that you said just made me think of this. It's important to have community and family of your own, so that you have that. And as we get older, although for me it happened, in my early 20s in my theater world, to have enough people in your life that are a genuine community of like-minded, like-hearted people, who you can count on, that maybe you start having Thanksgiving with them. Maybe you know that you can come home to those people. And it's so important to build and create that when you are away from your family and when you have to heal from your family, to have those people. It's also great when you have a spouse who is part of that as well. It starts to, bond everybody and close the gaps in what that is. And so if you don't have that, if you don't have a spouse, if you don't have a sense of community, it's such an important thing to build. We talk about this here all the time. We feel like we have that community here at the studio, and we have it in our lives, and it's always been something for me that I've had to have, partially because I left home very young and didn't really feel like I had that in my home life and in my family. And so when I started to build a community of people who I trusted and cared about, and I knew really cared for me and had my back and understood me, everything changed. And it was always healthy to come back to that. And as you get older, that becomes your family. We get a lot of questions about casting, about auditioning, about your careers and the business, and we want to focus on some of the ones we hear often. So we're going to take one right now with great question. Let's talk about that. So let's dive in.
So Paula in Chicago asks, how do I answer the dreaded question, so what have you been in? That's the one, isn't it?
I haven't seen you. What have you done lately?
Yeah,
what have you been up to?
How's it going down there?
How's it going down there?
Yeah. all that stuff.
In Hollywood.
A lot of versions of that same question ultimately might mean, have you done anything that I've seen, or are you successful yet, or whatever, and it speaks to a lack of understanding of what success means in this industry, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you got a couple options, and maybe you should even
write them
rehearse,
down. Yeah.
Practice them in the mirror, tape yourself to because there's the answer that is an answer asked that is given to someone who asks, who has the capacity to understand on some level what it is that you do, and that would require the patience to educate that person. I hear what you're asking, so here's how it all works, and here's my goal, and here's why I do it. And so last year I booked this thing. This year it's been a slower year. I did book this, but blah, 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 or whatever. Or, well, I actually got on a TV series, but this is blah, blah, blah. And then there's the answer from the snide jackass who is just, who knows? It's just, or they don't have the capacity.
They don't have the capacity.
And this is me projecting my own stuff because those questions are tricky. And they trigger me because I reference a lot of that old stuff from people who, look, you're from, I'm from Winnipeg, right? And so
that's
Winnipeg,
Canada.
Manitoba. And you come back having spent time in Hollywood,
Right.
Winnipeg, ultimately, it's a beautiful place. Ultimately, it's a blue-collar town. It's like minus 40 for like 2 months there.
Yeah.
They're a sturdy people, and there's a little bit of the tall poppy stuff, as they say in Australia, that like you don't want to show too much. When you say, how you doing? They say, not too bad, because to say good would be bragging.
Right.
So you come back all Hollywood, they want to maybe knock you down a couple pegs, It's
understood.
So those people might exist. So then how do you answer this question? So then to those people, you want to have a quick answer that shuts them up, I think, and whatever that is for you, but it's going really well. I've done this. Maybe offer your last credit, or I'm in this incredible class. I met these amazing agents. I'm really excited about the way things are going, full
Yeah,
stop.
and so that is an opportunity for you, whoever you're talking to actually look at what the pluses are, what the good shit is
That's
that you're
right.
doing. Because
Yes.
there is good stuff that you're doing. And so again, acknowledging what that is, really taking ownership of that, feeling that, so that you can honestly say, you know, I'm challenging myself by doing this kind of work. I'm producing a play that I really, really love.
Yeah.
I wrote something and I'm shooting a short film. I'm in a class that is just challenging me beyond.
Yeah.
You know, whatever that is that you're doing, that feels like you are really authentically doing that great work for yourself. And if you're not doing it, then you got to look at that.
Yep.
Because if you're coming home empty and it's really empty, and you got your tail between your legs and you're feeling all that shame and you're not doing anything about it,
Yep.
that it only gets, that's a microscopic situation. It only gets heightened and worse in those environments.
Right.
But when you come home, you feel shitty again, differently, but it's the same because you're not really taking ownership of that. So before you deal with those people, you got to look at what it is that you're doing for yourself to grow yourself as an artist. And that also may be outside of acting.
Right.
And we talk about that all the time. I was talking about in class this morning, the idea of what it means to be a creative being, to live a creative life, to be an artist. What does that look like? And then to really be able to talk about that when you talk to, whether it's the asshole, the person who doesn't get it, or the person you do care about, who you want to have an honest conversation with. You still have to be coming from that place of who you are as a creative being and what you're doing that you really can take ownership of and be proud of.
So there's an opportunity here to allow that question to make you look inside and see what it brings up for you. And by the way, it's the same thing that happens when you walk into an audition. You need to feel like you have a license to operate in there, like you have the authority to say, I'm an actor,
Yeah.
or I'm an artist. And so the cross-examination, oh, really, on what grounds, which might come up in that question from the uncle. You actually should be able to answer that question with authority. Because you know what the work means to you, and also you're in the doing of it, not just the, oh, well, I booked that or I didn't book this. And
That does not define you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you got to figure out what it is that you're doing that you love, and how then you can represent that to people. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. If you feel it, if you care about it, if you really can represent that from an honest place, then people will hear that. And if they don't, move on. So we have another question from Sandy from Iowa. And Sandy says that I go home and my family, who don't really leave the state or even the town, see me or don't see me, but they consider me invisible, and they don't acknowledge me, and I just don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, that's tricky because it brings up the lack of acknowledgement generally in your life. And so you have to walk into a situation not where anyone's going to be antagonistic, where they're not even going to do you the service of seeing you at all.
And that comes from being in such a sheltered environment and like in their own world so much, which is so small, that your world is not even, you can't even conceptualize it.
And I've heard people tell me that they go back to wherever they're from. I'm assuming that, Sandy is an actor and from Iowa,
Right.
but
who now lives in Los Angeles
or wherever,
yeah.
right?
Or New York.
And people have told me like they go back and they feel like an alien. They feel actually alien. And again, this speaks to you grow up and you're a little bit different, and that comes up a lot in what we hear from actors who have, like, if you think about taking the step to leave their home, wherever that is, all over the world,
Which is very brave.
it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And leave that place they came from to go to Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta, Vancouver, Toronto, Sydney, London, etc. And oftentimes that means that they were looking for something that they couldn't find there. And the folks that stayed there, sometimes, these are broad strokes, were content and found a life there and may never leave
They
there.
didn't have that yearning to bust out and find something else. And so
Right.
here you are, you've gone on this quest.
Right.
And whether it's satisfied or not, you come home
Right.
and it's not even acknowledged.
because they can't or don't understand or don't
Yeah.
want to understand or
Yeah.
are busy with their own lives. And
Yeah.
that's a level of disinterest and not seeing that's pretty profound.
And that feeds into your feeling potentially of not being seen by the industry,
Sure.
in your career, in your artistic expression, so that can make you feel small or invisible
Right.
or alien to their world. So what do you do with that?
Same stuff that we're saying for all of this. You have to come back to understanding them, understanding their limitations, understanding when you go there, because you likely have enough data to, from which to derive a conclusion that I'm not all of a sudden going to show up and they're going to look at me and ask about my life and acknowledge me. And on some level, be in full acceptance and get right with that.
Yeah.
And whether that means that you end up leading the conversation or showing up with the 4 things you can talk about that aren't religion, politics, or sex, or whatever, like those things that make everyone divide into MSNBC and Fox News, or like whatever that thing is, the compartments, and have your boundaries too.
Yeah, and have compassion for all of that and for them and their experience. Right. I always found that when I used to go home for Passover Seders, and sometimes people just didn't deal with me because they were so deep in their own shit. But I found that if I immersed myself in that and just released myself to that, this is where we are in this craziness, all of us together, and didn't expect anything from them and just resigned myself to being with them where they were at, it was such a relief for me. And then over time, even over a few hours, they got to see that, oh, yeah, it's like the old days. This is what we used to do when you were kids. And then to find some real human connection in that. But for me, it was just getting right with it and being relieved of expectation. Because you feel like you want validation from people who are in your family.
Sure.
And sometimes you're just not going to get that.
Yeah.
And then that also speaks to this thing we were talking about the other day, which has to do with that people think that you're fancy and that you sparkle, and that you live in Hollywood or you live in the Big Apple, you're on Broadway. And then what do you do with all that stuff? And they're pitching you. People pitch me all the time. They pitch me at weddings, they pitch me at bar mitzvahs, they pitch me at holiday dinners. Their ideas for reality shows, their ideas. This is my family story coming from the old country, and I've written it up for you in this Google Doc, and I want you to read it and make the movie. Will you do that? So that sometimes can be a real burden because people think you know fancy people. Do you know all those people? Can you get my movie made? Can you tell my story? Your eyes are widening. Steve, what is that?
Family, am I right? If you have a question that you'd like to have answered here on the Acting Podcast, email us at theactingpodcast@gmail.com. That's theactingpodcast@gmail.com. And put "great question" in the subject line so we'll know. We're ready to hear your question and offer our take on the answer. Go ahead and email today. We're here.
Before we get back to our conversation, we want to give you some added bonus stuff.
She said ad.
I did say ad. This is an ad, folks.
Finding and maintaining success as an actor requires intense focus in your acting work. It's a consistent practice.
But in a business this dynamic and this fraught with emotional landmines, achieving your goals also requires addressing specific elements of your career and your life. To be successful, you have to take a long look at what you want your career to look like and what practical daily steps you're taking to get there.
And you have to be taking responsibility for the mental and emotional roadblocks that keep you from success. So to make sure the work gets done, we offer career coaching and life design coaching. It's one-on-one, in person, at the studio, or via Skype and Zoom for actors all over the world.
In our career coaching sessions, you'll find ways to let go of guilt, doubt, fear, regret, and powerlessness, embrace your gifts, and come up with strategies to realize your projects, to network effectively, to engage with your representatives successfully, and to make money doing what you love. Together, we will turn the energy of frustration into the energy of doing and creating.
In life design coaching sessions, you'll come to a deeper awareness of the emotional and mental blocks that stand in your way. You'll change your relationship with those blocks, and then we'll tailor a doable, daily practice that creates positive change in your life. It's awareness to intention to action. It's about removing what's in your way and creating presence and power in your life so you can show up for yourself and your career.
So to schedule a career coaching or life design coaching session or a series of coaching sessions, go to BraymanGarciaBraun.com/coaching or click the link in our podcast show notes.
And if you use the promo code podcast, you get a 10% discount on your first session. So another thing that I think we should address here is family's not just your folks at home or whatever, or the people who you see every once in a while, but it's your partner, your spouse, the people that you're engaging in daily life with, raising a family together, making money together, building a life together. And that gets challenging if your spouse or partner is not an actor. I have great sympathy for those folks because they also then have to, by virtue of being with that actor, have to navigate the emotional violence and the financial and emotional ups and downs. It's very, very challenging. And so, again, it's the same principles. I think like an actor has to be able to know in their bones and be able to adequately articulate, because they know it in their bones, to their partner, this is why I'm doing this. This is what this means to me. If you're trying to put on some stuff, particularly with a person that you're going to be seeing every single day, it's going to be exhausting. If you're trying to present I'm so close to making it big, whatever the hell that means. That's false. Like, that's not what it is. So a really clear appraisal of what this is for you is really important, and your ability to articulate it to your partner is also very important, so that person doesn't make any assumptions. So it's super clear. And that means that you also have financial responsibilities that may not be met by the industry that you are responsible to your partner for, to a certain extent, if that's the nature of your relationship. But I think those really clear reality check conversations consistently allow you to enjoy the highs when they happen with your partner, but also continue to build a life from a place of truth when you're going to class and in the pursuit of growth artistically, and you have a couple shows that you book in a year and things aren't in this incredible boom kind of place. It's challenging.
Yeah, and it is about also being honest with yourself about what you need from that person and all of that, because you may hide that because it's just too hard. You don't want to bring that home. So how do you bring it home in a way that is honest and vulnerable, without always being in a state of I'm not enough, or this is not enough, or I'm not contributing enough, especially to somebody who doesn't quite get it 100%.
Sure.
And they may be even in the arts, they may be, a teacher or work in the music business or something else, but not really understanding what that is. So again, getting right with it for yourself, but being able to and willing to articulate that really truthfully, in a way that is honest and meaningful with somebody, because you're sharing a life. You may be sharing parenting, you may be definitely sharing finances,
right. And
then ultimately you're sharing other people in each other's lives, other family.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking back at my time pursuing an acting career, I don't think it's a coincidence that I could not or didn't hold down a long-term relationship that entire time, like 10, 15 years. And I think a good deal of that is that I didn't feel emotionally stable, certainly not financially stable, enough to feel like I had something to offer somebody. Like a great deal of insecurity in that regard, that I would, and again, here we're dealing with the stuff that I've been trying to see through the fog of my whole life, is this toxic masculinity stuff.
I was going to ask you about that. Did you feel responsible?
The earning potential, and your worth is how much you earn as a man.
And I think men struggle with that a lot because people don't talk about it.
Sure.
How do you come to the relationship if you're not the breadwinner?
Right. The manifestation of toxic masculinity is that you deal with that shame by, broing up and trying to present yourself as this tough guy or whatever. And arguably that's where elements of domestic violence comes from, that feeling small, not being able to deal with it, and pushing back as a result of it, overcompensating from it, needing control somehow. So, I mean, this stuff is deep. And so, and I certainly felt that I didn't have the ability to give anyone anything because, and by the way, even when I was like sitting on some cash for a couple of years because I booked a TV series or a couple of recurrings or whatever else, on some level I knew that if this is the life of the way up and the way down, that didn't work for me. And it makes me sad that I wasn't able to be in an emotionally stable place in a relationship during that time, but I just didn't have the tools or the skills. I now know that it's possible. But again, you have to do that work. I say this a lot. If a studio like this existed when I was back then and I was part of it, I probably would have seen a way through, because someone would have given me the tools to navigate that stuff.
And I think what we do is we look sometimes, maybe, I don't think this is a female thing, but maybe more so than men, I don't know. We look to relationships for people to take care of us because the business, our careers are not taking care of us in it. And so I know I looked to several different relationships to give me that, because I wasn't feeling that success, and I wanted someone to take care of me. Because I really could not take care of myself other than until I hit a place where I was financially comfortable with myself, and then I was in a different place.
Right. I'm thinking of a relationship I was in and these relationships get defined by where you are, right? Like if you're in this place of just like utter despair, I was in that place at a particular time, and a relationship emerged out of that place, and it was that other person was perhaps in a similar place, and then I booked a pilot that season, and the relationship didn't last. And to me, it was I was able to see what it was when I started working and was engaging in a certain way. And that person's since done very, very well, and I wish her well. But when you go to those places of not knowing, like you're just reacting, right? Like just dominoes. The business is just batting you around, and you're this emotional vampire looking for some sort of something
and that's what
in
happens.
this town.
Yeah.
And
as you go to the relationship, because you can't find it in,
right.
You don't get that juice in some part of your career. So now, and it's just not healthy.
Sure.
And so you end up in these ridiculous relationships where the relationship can never satisfy that.
Right. And so when I see relationships work really well, either between two actors or an actor and a non-actor, it's because the communication is there, which leads to the understanding. And look, success for an actor means, we've said this before, hey, it's Wednesday, you just book the thing, you're going to Toronto for 6 months, you get on a plane tomorrow. And then you think of, the spouse, for instance, of that person and the kids in school, and, requires a considerable amount of understanding and logistical flexibility, and on and on and on.
You know what? I found that Renee may not agree with me, but I think
Renee's
he does.
your husband, for those at home who don't know.
That when I moved to New York with a 1-year-old, an almost 1-year-old, and almost 2-year-old, to direct a movie, and had to just move my life across the country, and he was here not doing that. We had to communicate, and it was like such a hyper vigilant situation for us to communicate, and yes, a lot of logistical stuff, but I think we were probably clearer with each other then than we ever had been, or even have been since in some ways, because there was a need to really be on top of our shit, and it's really hard. But it was important to me that this work, and it was important to him that this work for me, and we made it happen. But it took incredible amount of work to get there.
Again, the stuff of like, the better you do, the harder it is. Like, it's not just that you book the thing in, one of our actors here, it really was like a Wednesday, you book the thing, Friday you're going to Atlanta, and you'll be there for 8 months. And so it's not just going to Atlanta to do the thing. It's like moving your entire life and your family. You got to find a place to live. What do you do about school or daycare or this or that other thing? Like, it's a considerable challenge to decide to engage in some sort of semblance of a normal, monogamous relationship or a family in some sort of standard traditional sense, and be in this industry. It's very, very challenging. It requires a great deal of communication and understanding.
And I think people will say, oh, well, what a great problem to have. I booked something in Atlanta for 8 months, so, how hard can that be? You just make it happen. Except,
I think yes, I mean, you do just make it happen, right?
Yeah.
That's what you want, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff there to be grateful about. But I think what you realize is that you realize what matters and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. So let's say you move to Atlanta and you're making all the money in the world because you're on a TV series, and your kid is unhappy. That money doesn't matter at all. And you realize that only in that situation, I think. Or when there's a strain on your marriage because you're really successful, you realize that success doesn't necessarily matter. So, these family relationships are really important. And this is where it also gets tricky, is that they require a great deal of work. Like any long-term relationship requires a considerable amount of work. So it means you have to have time, in all of the elation of I just booked the thing, to stop and sit down with your partner and have that discussion. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for you? Lest the whole life just be this whirlwind of whenever you book something, the whole family picks up, pulls up stakes and goes wherever they go,
I love what that is, and the whole notion of it comes back to self-awareness, to your values, and to the things that really matter to you, and communicating those things. I had an actor in class who said, I just finally explained to my husband why I need to come here, and I've been sort of sneaking out, like going, I'm going to class now, and I feel like I'm like cheating on him because I'm sneaking off to class because it's this little private thing I do, and then I come home feeling so guilty because I left him with the kids and the babysitter didn't show up, and and I have this secret. And she said, well, finally when I started to talk to him about what this meant to me and how important it was, she said, first of all, I broke down. But he was like, I wish I knew that. I feel like you're hiding something from me. And and then she explained that this was like, such an important part of her life, and that she'd started writing in class, but never told him. And she had these like secret scripts and journals and notebooks full of stuff, and he had no idea she was doing that. And she said, I know this sounds a little mushy, but she read him this thing that she had written, and they just had this real connection over it, and it just took the pressure off. And she said that she felt shame around it. And I think shame is something that comes up in all of this often,
right.
That we just, we don't feel like we are enough. And it comes up for all of us. It's not just for people who may not have an agent, or may not be auditioning enough, or may not be booking enough. It comes up around it all the time. I recently had a family thing, and somebody said to me, I don't see your name in the movies anymore. I saw it on that TV show. I didn't like that show. What was, and started telling me why they hated the show I was working on. Like, okay, I didn't make the show, but now I'm defending the show that I don't even, and then I'm thinking, I hate the show too. I don't know. Why am I defending this thing? But I thought, do I have to go to IMDb and look at my credits? Because now I feel like I don't exist because they were like, and then I said something to this person, and she said it was a friend of my mother's, an old friend of my mother's, and she said to me, oh, we just took such pride in your work when you were doing all those movies, and we just felt so much a part of it, and your success was our success. And I said, so this is your loss, this is your loneliness, this is your, and she said, what, I think you're right. I mean, it was a very articulate, and this is school teacher in New York and a dancer and all this other stuff, fairly enlightened, self-aware person. But I could have let that go and not said anything and felt like shit. And instead I confronted it, and we talked about it, and I realized that was her stuff, not mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that when, this is the other side of it, right? Like when you go home the conquering hero, when you've done all the work, and they get to say, yeah, that's our girl there. She came from us. Look what she did. And I think what's interesting, because this is the other side of going home when you haven't really booked much, is that there is that immense ego stroke that I think is another brass ring for folks. The hero's journey. You come back the hero. You did the thing and you come back. And I, to a certain extent, I had an acting career that was fine, but in those moments when things were going pretty well, and I came, like when the movie was out, and they could go see it in theaters, and I was back, that ego stroke is intense. It is. Oh, it's like you did the thing. Yeah. There was a thing that you were meant to do, and that you set out to do, and you did it. Oh my God! I was shooting this movie in the Czech Republic, and so I missed the premiere, the North American premiere of a movie I did, Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle.
Oh yeah.
And I came back from the Czech Republic right to my hometown for this wedding of a friend of mine, a Gujarati friend, Indian friend, and it was this Indian wedding. Well, I didn't piece together until I was there, a little bit jet lagged, that my character in Harold and Kumar was like a wild racist, specifically towards Indian folks. And only when I walked in and people started saying, "Oh my God, you're in the thing," I was like, "Oh shit." But it turned really quickly to that, hey, you're from where we're from, and you made it. And that's something that's intoxicating. It's so false, and it's so, as you say, like their stuff.
Yeah.
But it is intoxicating, and I think sometimes the going back when things are not going well, it's in the context of, but what I really want is to come back here and show them all that I made it, which is, a lot of BS. It's a lot of ego.
You got to look at that. Just know that that's a lot of old stuff, and that's not why we're all really doing this. But it comes up. I mean, sure, we want to fly the flag and post on social media and have our families and friends all celebrate it. And we work really hard. You guys work so hard at this thing. Yeah. So that's another thing to be able to say to people. Yeah, I work really hard at this. I care about it deeply. And that's the acknowledgement.
Sure.
You're a warrior in all of this, and that's something to acknowledge and just realize again what is important about this to you. But that if people understand, but again, they don't understand what the work is. They understand. So you go to medical school and you go through all these years and you become an intern and resident and yada yada. So that's 10 years. But if you can liken that to this, that this may take that many years, but it is an internship and a residency and a lifelong practice that, again, putting it into context, because people don't get that. They think it's like you go to Hollywood, you go to Broadway, you make it, you're getting the awards. Like,
I love when you say Broadway.
Well, when I grew up, that's what people said. Go to the Broadway. Yeah.
So I think you have to understand that you're going to be an outlier when you go back for the most part. And that can either put you in the out group, or with self-knowing, with boundaries, with understanding and compassion, it can make you a leader. And I think that's an important point in all of it, that you can show up with an understanding that you might be a little bit different and your views and everything else may be a little bit different. And you can lean into all those conversations from a place of authority, which might make your time a little bit easier.
Yeah. And so with family and with your own partners, to lead with vulnerability and honesty and authentic, truthful expression changes everything. We love sharing this content with our community. We offer it 100% free, and it's our privilege to do so. If you're loving this podcast and are interested in offering something in return, go ahead and subscribe to the Acting Podcast. Then find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen to your podcast, and leave us an honest rating and review. Your words will help us bring this work to even more actors and artists around the world.
Thank you so much for listening and for being here with us. We love how this community shows up for us and for each other, online and in the studio. And as a thank you to our incredible community, we want to give you an amazing free gift. It's called the Comprehensive Guide to the Perfect Self-Tape.
So all you have to do is screenshot your review, send it to theactingpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll send you an exclusive gift of the Perfect Self-Tape Guide to take your work to the next level.
And come visit us online at thebgbstudio.com. And if you're in LA, Atlanta, or New York, jump into a class with us. We're here to get you into the kind of shape necessary to be successful.